Well, Stats SA has released the subjective poverty in South Africa findings from the General Household Survey for 2019. It found that black African-headed households had the highest levels of subjective poverty across the poverty measures. This survey uses three measures, namely the self-perceived wealth question, the income evaluation question, and the minimum income question. These all found that according to the self-perceived wealth indicator, 30.5% of black African households perceive themselves as poor, while 57.4% reported a per capita household income not exceeding their desired minimum income required to meet the household's needs. For more on this, we're joined now via Zoom by Social Security researcher Nkululeko Majozi. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Majozi. Thanks very much for availing yourself here to SABC News, sir.
Good afternoon, Flo. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon to your viewers.
Let's talk about the accuracy of a subjective analysis. I mean, of course, the understanding is that this is how people perceive themselves. They perceive their poverty. I can sit here and say that I think that I am poor, but that might not be necessarily the reality. So why is that important? Why is it important to have a subjective question on this?
I think internationally it's recognized that people are the best, people themselves are in the best position to evaluate where the state of their well-being. So it's important to conduct such kind of research and surveys to ask people themselves about their own state of well-being. As you would know, Stats SA also has what is usually referred to as an objective way of looking or of coming with statistics around poverty or the incidence of poverty in the country, and that is based on the national poverty lines. But this is a much more humane way of measuring poverty because it gives people that agency of evaluating their own situations and looking at their own situations and saying whether they are well off or not.
Yeah, and I mean, let's talk about the areas of concern that maybe are reflect. Is there, increases in, let's say, in poverty, for example? And maybe if you can give us your analysis and general reaction to the poverty stats.
I think the poverty stats really, what they do is that they reinforce what research has already revealed before, that poverty is related closely to income poverty. So it's related to people's ability to earn money, and that is determined by people's labor market participation, which is also determined by people's skills and level of education attainment. Yeah. And what we see with these results is that people or households with lower attainment of education report a higher incidence of poverty, and it's the other way around with households that have higher levels of education attainment. Also related to employment, what we find is that households that do not have a single person working also report a higher level of poverty, whilst households with at least one person employed in that household also they report a much lower level or lower incidence of poverty. So as I say, the statistics reinforce what we already know. Poverty is related to people's ability to earn. It's also determined by people's ability to work, which is also determined by people's level of skill and education.
Yeah, and the impact of COVID-19 can't be ignored, obviously, because it has obviously changed the lives of many people. And I wonder if COVID-19 might have perhaps pushed people who weren't necessarily poor into poverty. Was there something that you picked up while looking at the poverty stats in terms of, when we are talking about the increase in poverty, could some of that also have been related to the issue of dealing with a pandemic? And of course, as we've seen, many people losing work.
I think, yes, it's quite true. COVID-19 has had a detrimental effect, especially in terms of employment. But we need to acknowledge as South Africans that we are already facing a humanitarian and socio-economic crisis before the incidence of COVID-19 in 2020, at the beginning of 2020. So COVID-19, what it basically did is exacerbated what was already an unfolding crisis, a crisis of jobs, a crisis of inequality. You know, our economy hasn't been able to create the number of jobs and at the scale that is needed to be able to accommodate the number of people that are coming into the job market on a yearly basis. So yes, COVID-19 has actually made the situation worse, because what you have found is that we have lost a lot of employment, even in the informal sector, where most of our less educated people, and especially women, are able to make a living. And with the effect of the COVID-19 enforced lockdowns, we saw huge losses in employment in that sector. So yes, COVID-19 has had a detrimental effect, but we should not shy away from pointing out that we have been facing the socio-economic crisis before COVID-19.
Yeah, you know, Mr. Majozi, I'm always interested, you know, when we run these surveys and have these stats, you know, what's then done about it? What's the purpose then of these stats going forward? I hope it's not a case of, you know, government officials just looking at it and going, oh, that's interesting, and moving along. What then? Now what? Now that we have these numbers and we have, you know, where, you know, perceptions of where people see themselves and so forth, what then? What is that information then used to do? And hopefully it's for the benefit of those people who do in fact see themselves as poor and are indeed poor in fact.
That's very much true, Flo, and I agree with you. Research is there to inform policy. It's there to inform the kinds of solutions that are needed to bring people out of this quagmire of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. But now the problem is that in as much as we have good research in South Africa, when it comes to the implementation part of doing things, there's a lot of contestation when it comes to the macroeconomic outlook of the country. So I think for me, in my analysis, the problem is with the macroeconomic outlook of our country, the things that we choose to the things that we choose to prioritize vis-a-vis the things that we should be prioritizing. You know, if you look at the budget speech that was released or announced last month by the Minister of Finance, you find that there's so much tax concession for the private sector. So a lot of money is being channeled towards the private sector, but the private sector is not creating the number of jobs that we need. You know, so there's a lot of money going towards rich people and less money towards poor people who need the money. As I said before, poverty in South Africa is strongly related to income poverty and income inequality. So any measure that is put in place to deal with poverty and inequality in South Africa has to be based on providing South Africans with basic income security and also access to things such as land and other financial assets that can help people to build up their wealth status. But we find what we find is that the opposite is happening, and we had been hoping as research organizations and also civil society organizations that there would be an announcement around some sort of permanent basic income support for poor South Africans from the budget speech, but that is still not forthcoming. So yeah, that's my analysis in a nutshell.
We appreciate that analysis so very much. Thank you for giving us your time, sir, here on SABC News. Until next time, cheers and take care.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's Nkululeko Majozi, who's a social security researcher.